All kids deserve parents, but some parents don't deserve kids. Today we will be going over the most evil parents of all time. From the parents who starved their kids until they began to eat paint off the walls, to a mother that committed murder. Let's start with Seth Welch and Tatiana Fusari. In 2018, Welch and his partner Fusari made national headlines for all the wrong reasons. They first got on Child Protective Service's radar back in 2014, when THC was found in their eldest child's system at birth. THC is the primary psychoactive component in marijuana. And no, it isn't naturally occurring in any supplement or diet recommended for pregnant mothers. Welch and Fusari would go on to have two more children. And in August 2018, Welch called 911 to report that something had happened to their 10-month-old daughter, Mary. On the call, Seth told a dispatcher that his daughter was, in his own words, dead as a doorknob. The couple had put Mary to sleep by 3:30 p.m. and didn't check on her until the next day. Because what could possibly go wrong? When they eventually went to check on her by 10 a.m. the next morning, her body was cold. It turns out Welch and Fusari were in the habit of leaving their infant unattended for nearly 20 hours at a time. They also didn't provide the baby and their other two kids with basic needs like food, water, and healthcare. Investigations showed that Mary died of chronic malnutrition and dehydration. At the time of her death, she weighed 8 pounds. For context, the average weight for a healthy 10-month-old baby is 18 pounds. After lengthy trials, Welch and Fusari were sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Joshua and Brandy Wayans. The most shocking thing about the Wayans is how far they were willing to go to evade consequences. In December 2016, police made their way to the home of Joshua and Brandy Wayans. They weren't stopping by for Christmas cookies and eggnog. They had received an anonymous call, and the caller reported that 3 children were being kept under horrible conditions in the house. When the police entered the house, they found 2 girls and a boy between the ages of 4 and 6 trapped in a filthy room. All 3 kids weighed below 30 pounds and were covered in bruises. They had lice on them, and doctors reported that the 2 oldest kids were days away from death by starvation. The children had starved to the point that they had started eating the paint off the wall. When police took Joshua and Brandy into custody, things got a little crazy because they both denied being related to the kids. Okay, Brandy, if you're going to lie about it, at least don't post it. 3 months before the children were found by the police, Brandy had made a Facebook post calling the boy her son. After several contradicting statements about whether or not they were the biological parents of the 3 children, Joshua and Brandy were tried and sentenced. Joshua Wayans was sentenced to 19.5 to 39.5 years in prison, while Brandy Wayans was sentenced to 18.75 to 37.5 years. Mark and Misty Ray. You see, the thing is, Mark and Misty were monsters. On the surface, they were upstanding citizens who ran a licensed childcare center with 112 children. But back at home, they also had a good number of foster and adopted children. Among the adopted children was 16-year-old Sabrina Ray. Mark and Misty adopted Sabrina in 2013. Being a part of the Ray household was a lot like living in hell, and I mean that literally. The children were forced to drink soapy water, sleep on thin mattresses on the floor, stand over cold vents, and even eat their own vomit. The children in the Ray household barely had anything to eat, and whenever Mark and Misty were feeling generous, they would set up a twisted version of Hunger Games. They would provide oatmeal and make the children fight each other for it. Sabrina had health problems, and a month before she died, her adoptive brother drop-kicked her down the basement staircase, rendering her unable to walk, talk, eat, or drink. You're probably thinking, this is the part where the Rays took her to get medical attention, right? Wrong. What they did was take their sons on a trip to Disney World in Florida. The truth about the Rays came to light when someone in the house called 911 about a girl who was unresponsive. When police arrived, Sabrina was dead. Mark and Misty were arrested and charged for their crimes. Misty received a life sentence without the possibility of parole, and Mark was sentenced to a total of 80 years behind bars. John Pomeroy and Rebecca Long. As far as evil stepmothers go, I'm certain Rebecca Long would give Cinderella's stepmother a run for her money. After getting married to John Pomeroy, Rebecca Long decided that his daughter, who we will call Susie because she isn't named in any documents, had behavioral problems and took it upon herself to fix the situation. How did she do this? If you guessed sending the child to therapy, you're wrong. Rebecca's idea of discipline was pretty simple. No food and no water. Susie was allowed to have 1 meal per day, and all she had was toast and 3/4 a cup of water. If you're wondering why Susie didn't just drink water when Long was not looking or when she was at school, it was because Long was always looking and she was homeschooled. Long also made sure that Susie slept in the same room as her, and once, when she caught her drinking from the toilet bowl, Long taped Susie's hands behind her back, then dunked her head in. So where exactly does John Pomeroy come in all of this? He watched the entire thing go on and didn't lift a finger to protect his daughter. The abuse continued for over 4 years until a concerned neighbor called child welfare authorities. Susie was removed from the house while Pomeroy and Long were arrested and charged. Angela Norman. This one was truly heartbreaking. Angela was a mother of 14-year-old Michaela Norman who died from nutritional and medical neglect complicated by her chronic condition. Michaela had cerebral palsy, which means she had to rely heavily on her mother to take care of her. But Angela simply couldn't be bothered. When authorities examined Michaela, her body was covered in bed sores and weighed 28 pounds, more than 100 pounds less than the average weight for a 14-year-old girl. Even though she was sick, the real cause of Michaela Norman's death was malnutrition. And so Angela was arrested and charged with involuntary manslaughter and child endangerment. She pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 9 years in prison. 3 nurses who were also supposed to participate in caring for Michaela were also charged. John and Linda Dollar. This couple's parenting style was the stuff of nightmares. The Dollars lived with their 7 adopted children in suburban Florida. John worked as a commercial real estate appraiser, and Linda stayed home to homeschool the kids. While this sounds like nothing out of the ordinary, something sinister was at play. Behind closed doors, 5 of the 7 children were subjected to unimaginable torture. John and Linda starved the children to the point that they became malnourished and tortured them by yanking out their toenails with pliers. Other times, when they were feeling particularly evil, the couple would switch things up by using an electric cattle prod and bondage equipment. For some reason, the Dollars favored 2 of the 7 children, and they received preferential treatment. The truth about the happenings in the Dollar household came to light when one of the kids landed in the hospital with a head wound and red marks on his neck. While the investigation was ongoing, all the children were taken from the Dollars and placed in foster care. By the time the police set out to arrest John and Linda Dollar, they had disappeared. When they were finally arrested in Utah, they claimed they had just taken a drive to clear their heads and weren't on the run. Yeah, right. In September 2005, John and Linda Dollar pleaded no contest to aggravated child abuse and were sentenced to 15 years each in prison. David and Louise Turpin. In January 2018, authorities carried out a welfare check in the home of David and Louise Turpin, and what they found sparked national outrage. The Turpins had 13 children together, or should I say victims. David and Louise Turpin subjected their children to various forms of torture, including starvation, cruel beatings, and sometimes tied them to their beds for weeks. The children weren't allowed to go to school and were only allowed to take baths once a year. At some point, David and Louise locked 10 of their children in a trailer on their property and took the youngest ones with them. They would bring some groceries every week, but not enough to feed everyone. One child said she would get so hungry that she began to eat ketchup, mustard, and ice. The Turpins kept their children away from everyone to hide the abuse. The only contact the children have with the outside world was when their parents took them to Disneyland. David and Louise then uploaded pictures from this visit to Facebook, because nothing says happy family like a group picture taken at Disneyland. The Turpin children continued to suffer for years, and even when the 7th oldest child passed at the age of 18, nothing changed. Help finally came when Jordan, one of the children, summoned the courage to run away and call for help. She called 911 and told the police everything. Louise and David were arrested immediately, and they both received life sentences. Andrea Yates. Some people argue that Andrea Yates isn't exactly evil because her case is deeply rooted in mental health struggles, but I'll let you be the judge of that. From a young age, Andrea battled an eating disorder and depression, but she seemed to have gotten better by the time she met and married her husband, Russell Yates, whose nickname is Rusty, by the way, but I digress. After getting together, Andrea and Russell decided they would have as many babies as nature allowed. Things were going swimmingly for the couple until Andrea's depression resurfaced after the birth of their 4th child. This was an extremely trying time for the family, as Andrea was in and out of the hospital and her mental health continued to deteriorate. When Andrea showed signs of improvement, she was discharged. but not before her doctor advised her not to have any more children to prevent future psychotic depression. You probably already know where this is going. 7 weeks later, Andrea was pregnant again. In March 2001, Andrea's father passed away, and she fell apart. She became suicidal and was in and out of the hospital. Because of her condition, Andrea's doctor advised that she should never be left alone. But on June 20th, 2001, her husband, Russell, left her with the kids and headed to work. In his defense, his mother was scheduled to arrive in an hour. But unfortunately, that was all the time Andrea needed. In the space of an hour, she filled up the bathtub and drowned her kids in it, one after the other. That's it for today. Which of these parents do you think is the most evil? Let me know.